A struggle for justice for almost a decade. Sri Lanka's civil conflict may be long over, but will those responsible ever be held to account? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmakers are Sri Lanka's victims of war. During Sri Lanka's almost 30 years of civil war, tens of thousands of people lost their lives as government forces battled the Tamil Tigers. It's nearly a decade after the bloodshed ended, but scars still remain. In 2015, when President Sirisena came to power, he agreed with the UN to look into alleged war crimes that took place towards the end of the fighting. But so far, very little has been done. Critics say there is a lack of political will to seriously look into the allegations. So, is it becoming a case of justice delayed? Is justice denied? In the second part of our special series on Sri Lanka, Natalie Perhonen spoke to survivors of the brutal civil war who are still hoping for answers.
These are the relatives of the disappeared. They've been staging a roadside protest in Vavonia for almost a year. They want to know what happened to their children and their husbands who went missing during Sri Lanka's civil war. And they want the government to reunite them. Jayavanita Kasapalai is here because the military separated her from her daughter Jerome as they were fleeing fighting in March 2009.
A lot of children were made to get into buses. Not parents though. I was holding on to my daughter, hugging her tightly and crying. And she was the same. I tried to get on the bus, but I was beaten. The bus left without me.
Jayavanita says her daughter is alive and that the government knows where she is because she believes her daughter is in this campaign poster from 2015, next to the future president, Maithripala Sirisena.
My child must be thinking that if her mom was alive, she will definitely find her. She must have figured out my love and affection for her, because I struggled so hard to save her from being taken away.
The families of the disappeared come from Tamil and Sinhalese backgrounds, but they share the same search for answers. Arusili Cruz describes her husband Raji as a good man. She hasn't seen him since he was abducted outside their home on March 2nd, 2007.
I have gone to every single authority I can think of, including police stations, army and navy camps, the infamous Busa naval camp at Gol, and even to the Criminal Investigation Department to find him.
She says the government has to take action for all families, not just hers.
We need to know what happened to the disappeared people. If they committed any wrong, you can certainly punish them, but give them back to us at the end of it. All we need to know is whether they're alive or not.
For 26 years, Sri Lanka was embroiled in a civil war between government forces and the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. The group was fighting for an independent Tamil homeland, and it nearly tore the nation apart. There were allegations of war crimes on both sides. Across the country, there are physical reminders of the military victory led by the former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Battle sites have turned into places for reflection. But nearly a decade on from the end of the war, it's clear not all of the scars from fighting have healed. When the current government came into power in 2015, it made a series of promises to Sri Lankans. It would promote reconciliation and accountability for rights violations during the civil war. But the pace of progress has been slow, and there are many victims who are still seeking justice, which means the legacy of the war continues to haunt the daily life of many people.
The president keeps promising that he will not touch the war heroes as such. So the narrative with regard to the war, that this was a war that was fought with clean hands on the part of the government, which is a blatant lie, as we know from UN reports and otherwise, is something that continues with the present regime.
Gurupuran says many Tamils voted for the coalition government led by President Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in the hope there would be post-war reform.
So in a sense, for me, accountability and political solution, both for this government are a foreign policy management issue. It is not something that they inherently feel as something that this country needs to transition from the precarious past to a future that will be a much more inclusive and accommodative Sri Lanka.
The Sri Lankan government made an ambitious set of promises at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in 2015. It's recorded as Resolution 30/1. It would set up 4 pillars of transitional justice: truth, justice, reparations, and guarantees of non-recurrence. A key component would include establishing a judicial mechanism to investigate allegations of violations and abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law. In 2017, Sri Lanka asked the Council for more time to deliver on those promises. The nation is still waiting. For many, those delays are unacceptable because they're blocking the path to reconciliation.
The perpetrators are also among us. They are also our brothers and sisters, or cousins, or uncles, or aunties, or classmates, or work colleagues. Primarily the soldiers from both sides. So we need to also reconcile how we are living among these people who have killed our own brothers and sisters, who have stolen land, and engaged in sexual violence and gender-based violence of a horrific nature.
Mano Tiptawala is the man overseeing the various reconciliation activities the country committed to under the UN resolution. He says the pace of transitional justice has been slow, but it is necessary.
Every additional day is a painful day for the victims and their families, so we are very cognizant of that. But at least this time we are doing something concrete, which is not going to be just a report and going away. We'll have to ask them to be a little more patient, and also we have to educate them on exactly what will happen. And hopefully in the next few years the process will start.
Which means the war is continuing to cast a shadow, long after the last shots were fired. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers, Colombo.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Colombo by Jehan Pereira. He's the Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. And in London, we have Ravi Kumar. He's the Secretary General of the British Tamils Forum. Gentlemen, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Jehan Pereira, let me begin with you. There was an interesting line, a headline from the Sri Lanka Guardian, which said, "Mass graves everywhere, but where are the killers?" And it was basically referring to how unresolved the issue of justice is in the post-Civil War Sri Lankan political existence. Is it a situation where things are fundamentally unresolved in Sri Lanka right now?
Yes, you're right. It is. There is this problem of missing persons and unresolved political situation where the roots of the civil war have not been addressed as yet. The policies of reparations and truth-seeking are still to be implemented. On the positive side, however, the new government that came into power in 2015 has been moving in the direction of addressing these problems, but the progress has been very slow.
Right. Ravi Kumar, certainly. Yeah, allow me to bring in Ravi Kumar here, because we're going to kind of separate out these issues and take them in bite-sized chunks, if you don't mind, over the next 15 minutes or so. Ravi Kumar, this coalition government that came in 2015, we've heard from Jehan that they've made some developments. Does that encourage you?
No, because even after a new government took over, the issues remain unresolved, and the political will on the part of the new government is not steady, and they are openly all the political leaders, including President and the Prime Minister, saying they are not going to bring the perpetrators from the security forces to justice. So this is a very clear message to the international community that they are not going to take the accountability issue seriously.
Jihan Pereira, is that true, that there's a victor's justice at play here? If the Tamil Tigers did terrible things, they face justice. But if the security forces didn't, well, that doesn't seem to find anybody who ends up in the dock or anywhere else.
That is true, that the government has been very reluctant to go after those who committed crimes during the war from the side of the military. But I suppose if you look at international experience, it takes time before the perpetrators on the winning side can be brought to justice. Sri Lanka is a democracy, and the government is dependent on the votes of the majority. And here, the ethnic majority, the army of the ethnic majority won the war. And it is very difficult. It was a very bitterly fought war, very divisive war. And it is difficult for the government now to turn around and say that the soldiers who won the war should be punished.
Mm-hmm. A really interesting point. Ravi Kumar, what do you make of that? This idea that Sri Lankans, particularly the Sinhalese majority, have long memories and deep scars. Maybe, many people had family members, for example, who might have been affected by Tamil Tiger terrorism, and they don't really have that sense of enthusiasm for trying their own soldiers from a war that they won. What do you make of that?
Yeah, Tamils in the island have been struggling for a long time, ever since the independence of Ceylon, the former Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Last 70 years of their fight for their political rights has not been addressed, while every single government came to power, ignoring the rights of the Tamils. The structural issues are not addressed. Ever since the end of the war in 2009, the governments, the international community proposed various resolutions. Now it is the fifth resolution, and the resolution brought to the UN Human Rights Council in 2015, reinstated in 2017 March, it has almost 25 commitments undertaken by the Sri Lankan government. Out of 25, none of them have been addressed fully or even partially. Mm-hmm. So that includes the victims of disappeared. We are continuously requesting the government on behalf of the victims to release the names of those who were arrested or surrendered during the last phase of the war. Whoever is arrested or whoever released, and whoever now remain in custody. So why the government cannot address this issue by releasing? Because the president already committed that he will request the security forces to release this list. Why the delay?
Okay, so Jihan, very directly then, is it clear that the government might be hiding potential war criminals and protecting potential war criminals?
I mean, I agree with everything that Ravi said. Then the problem is for us is how to get the government, how to get our society to move forward. The people that are considered to be war criminals, on the side the Tamils believe that they're war criminals, are also people whom the Sinhalese think are war heroes for having won the war, for having defeated a foe that the international community and we in Sri Lanka also thought was undefeatable. So a lot of atrocities took place on both sides. The Sinhalese feeling is that, well, the past has now happened, let's move to the future without looking too much into the past. But we have to look at the past too. We have to look at the past for the sake of justice to the Tamils who are victims, and also to ensure that the past does not recur. So yes, there are people who did terrible things who are not being exposed at this time. But as I said, if you look at other countries too, it takes time before a society matures and a society becomes strong enough to take on the government. Those who acted on behalf of the state, who in the minds of the majority of people ensured the unity of the country which was going to be divided.
Ravi, let me give you a bit of a choice here. Let me ask you, if you only could choose one, which was either complete justice and those people who committed atrocities against Tamils facing justice, or the Sri Lankan government addressing some of the structural issues that you mentioned, for example, economically in the north and the east, pumping money into the region, developing the place, putting it into education, allowing for greater, perhaps, federalism and for greater autonomy amongst ethnic Tamils? Which one would you choose?
Without addressing the justice issue, there won't be any reconciliation. A real reconciliation and peace will be brought back by addressing the justice issue and identifying what are the issues, structural issues led to the conflict and so many death of lives. So that is one of the priority. We want peace, and we want every citizen to be treated equally, with enjoying all their rights. While this can happen only addressing the justice accountability issue, whereas what we see so far, even after 3 years coming to power, the new government cannot address the issues of low-hanging fruits, like releasing the land to the rightful owners, releasing the list of those who were arrested, and also as it agreed to the international community and to the European Union during their GSP Plus reinstatement, repeal and replace the Prevention of Terrorism Act. These are not happening.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, so you mentioned them as low-hanging fruit. Let me ask Jehan. We have Ravi saying that the government can't even do the simplest stuff. So is it possible that both the Prime Minister and the President in this coalition just don't want to sift through all the ugly stuff? It's just not a priority for them right now. They won the war. They're trying to grow their economy. They're trying to develop their country. This is just not a priority to try and deal with all this sticky, ugly stuff from the past.
See, we must remember that the present government, the present president, who won the election in 2015, he did not get the vote, the majority of the ethnic majority's vote. The ethnic majority actually voted against him. He won the election because the ethnic minorities, the Tamils and the Muslims, voted almost unanimously in his favor. So this is a government which is not terribly strong among the Sinhalese majority. And in fact, they are facing elections on February 10th, which the former president is saying is a referendum on which way the country should go. The former president who won the war is very strong. He remains very popular. He's treated as a man who did what no one else could have dreamt would be done. So in that context, this government has done one very great thing.
But then was that his limit? I mean, Jehan, was that ultimately the ceiling that he hit? Because after that, if he doesn't have the support of the majority, there's nothing really he can do after that.
The present president is trying to get the support of the majority. And that is his challenge. So he has to, and the government has to take the majority along with it. That is why everything is slow. But it's not true that nothing is happening. Land is being given back. Constantly land is being given back. An office of missing persons has been established. The law has been passed in Parliament. The problem is that the commissioners have still to be appointed. So it's slow, but we are hopeful that in the next few weeks or months, that too will happen. Everything is in the going in the correct direction, it is going slow. And for the Tamil people who suffered, who are victims, they can't wait. I understand that they want results now, but things are going in the correct direction,
Okay.
and that's what makes me optimistic.
Okay. Ravi, are you satisfied by that? It's going in the right direction. It's not going as fast as you would like it to go, but it's happening.
It's not going in the right direction. It is going in the usual way the previous government handled this by dragging the issues out of the focus of international community. Even 2 days before, when the peaceful demonstration held outside the Sri Lankan High Commission in London, the defense attaché, Brigadier Priyanka Fernando, came out and he was filmed motioning death threats to the peaceful demonstrators. So this is a kind of threat that shows the outrages or the death squads and the structure still remain intact to be used if in future. So how can the people in the Northeast have the confidence on the government or any other institutions, national institutions? So this is where the international community have to intervene and pressurize the government to undertake its commitments, deliver its commitment. But we are asking for a time-bound plan with benchmarks, clear time-bound plan with benchmarks of those all commitments, 25 commitments they have undertaken twice, not once. So the government is not coming out with a clear time-bound plan. This is where we are seeing that this is a process handled by the government where the president, he encourages the security forces, as he is quoted by the media, that he won't bring any of the war heroes to the justice process.
Okay, so let me then pose that to Jihan. So, Jihan, we have Ravi saying, A, the government is dragging its feet, B, they don't have any appetite to try anybody who might have committed atrocities, and C, using the example of the response to those protesters, he's not happy that there's still a condescension from the Sinhalese majority and maybe the political leaders, right? There's a condescension towards the Tamils. They feel that the Tamils don't have a case or don't have a voice and shouldn't say anything. Is any of that true in your opinion?
Well, I'm sorry that the defense attaché or the diplomat in London has come and issued death threats. That is not correct. He should not have done that. That is not the way the president and the prime minister speak. What is most significant about the last 3 years is that the culture of terror, of impunity, has gone away. And I would say that most people, including Tamils, would feel a sense of freedom and ability to speak freely, to travel, to move around, which was not there in the past. This government is not anti-Tamil. It is not anti-minority. It is not able to, at this time, deliver justice to the Tamils. But some of the government members, the army commander, for instance, has gone on record saying, those who have committed crimes are not war heroes. Those are war criminals. He has said it. Now, the question is whether they can actually take these people who the majority of people think are war heroes to justice at this time. A government that still is trying to get the support of the majority of the ethnic majority. Whether it can do this at this time is doubtful. But there are other things. I agree, the low-hanging fruit must be obtained. And I'm hopeful that if the government does well at the forthcoming local government elections, which the opposition has said is a referendum, that there will be progress after that election.
Right.
The question is whether the government will indeed do that well.
Yep, interestingly put. Ravi, many people see tweaking or changing the constitution as a possible solution to the underlying issues where it's maybe stated more explicitly that minorities have a place in Sri Lankan society, that they are equal citizens. If this government ends up changing that constitution and putting in stronger wording into that constitution, would you see that as a good step forward?
Yeah, I want to go on record that the current president has openly said the war heroes won't be punished, won't be brought to justice. Second thing, the constitution reform process is going on. We are watching, and the process. This process has to be incorporated with all the transitional justice mechanisms in constitutional with constitutional amendments. And if a strong power sharing arrangement is brought and discussed, then the Tamil people have a say on how it would be. But so far, we haven't seen a strong power sharing arrangement in the last the draft release.
Okay, gentlemen, it's been great to get a deeper dive on the situation in Sri Lanka right now, particularly as it marks 70 years of independence. Lots of scars, long memories, a lot of people felt pain, and the country in the process of trying to move forward together. We'll be watching Sri Lanka very closely here on the Newsmakers, but for the moment, Jihan Pereira and Ravi Kumar, I thank you very much for your time. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Day Zero draws near, the day when Cape Town's taps turn off. But who's to blame for the water crisis? And Russia's President Vladimir Putin is accused of suppressing the identity of Tatars. Is that really the case? Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Could you survive on only one of these bottles an hour? Bear in mind, you have to cook, shower, wash your clothes, and flush the toilet. And it usually takes about 6 of these to do just that. Well, that's the reality for people who live in Cape Town right now. The South African city is in the middle of one of its worst droughts in centuries, and people are being limited to just 50 liters a day. To put that into perspective, the average American uses 300. Unless Cape Town gets some serious rainfall very soon, it will become the world's first major city to run out of water. Here's Vanessa Keneally.
In Cape Town, the countdown has begun to May 11th for what's been dubbed Day Zero. A day that the world's first major city could run out of water. But how did things get to this very low point? Well, years of extreme drought have already caused water in dams to drop below 30%. And once the level dips to 13.5%, Cape Town's supply will be cut off. The 4 million people living in the city have already begun to feel the effects. Water usage had been limited to 87 litres per person per day. But when only 39% of the population stuck to this rule, the taps had to be tightened even further. Now each person can only use 50 litres a day. Residents have also been reduced to taking 2-minute showers a day, as well as being banned from filling swimming pools, watering their gardens, or washing their cars.
We were here on Sunday night and they were pushing and shoving. There must have been at least 1,000 people trying to get water here on Sunday night every day.
I'm disappointed that we are where we are today, because I just feel yes, those that had to take care of us didn't actually do their jobs.
Extreme drought has hit Cape Town before, but population growth and a lack of adequate infrastructure has made this time a lot worse. Between 1995 and 2018, the city grew by around 80%, with the capacity for water storage only increasing by 15%. Cape Town has 6 major reservoirs. Satellite images show the biggest of these is in the worst condition, with water levels having shrunk dramatically in the past 4 years. And while city officials have tried to replenish resources by diverting rainfall from another river, building desalination plants and drilling for groundwater, it's a drop in the bucket of what's needed. The lack of water is also affecting tourism. The city gets 10 million visitors a year who boost the economy as well as employment. But people have already begun cancelling their trips. Winter rains in Cape Town usually begin in April, but can also start as late as June, making the coming weeks an uncertain time. The hope now is that Mother Nature will refill the city's dams over the coming months and give politicians time to find a solution. Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Cape Town is Councillor Xanthia Limburg. She's a mayoral committee member for Water and Sanitation with the Democratic Alliance, which runs the local government. And we also have Kevin Winter. He's the lead researcher at the Future Water Institute at the University of Cape Town. I thank you both for joining us. Xanthia, is it an embarrassing situation for you, given that you're in government, you're in charge of this, and Cape Town might become the first city internationally to run out of water? Is it an embarrassment for you?
It's not an embarrassment because we are in the situation because of impacts of climate change and global warming. We've received 3 years of below average rainfall, and the city of Cape Town, like every other municipality, is not responsible for the provision of bulk water supply. This is the role of national government, particularly the Department of Water and Sanitation. It is the city's role to ensure that we maintain a water reticulation infrastructure, that we reticulate water to people's homes, and that we treat that water according to appropriate drinking standards. The city has driven a mass range of demand management interventions and water conservancy programs to ensure greater water sustainability for our region. And so we have gone above and beyond as the city, beyond our core competency, and we don't believe that we should feel embarrassed at all. We have tried to manage the situation as best as possible, and we are focused on ensuring that we overcome this drought in every single meaningful way.
Xanthia, do you believe that you could not have done any better in any way possible over the past few years in managing the situation, given that there were warnings for more than a decade that this could happen?
Well, the city has played a really progressive role in water supply within the region. We draw from what is called the Western Cape Supply System, which is a grouping of dams which provides water to the city of Cape Town, as well as other municipalities and the agriculture sector. The city has gone above and beyond to ensure that we manage our demand. We've never drawn more than what is allocated to us. We've been able to flatline and decouple our water consumption from population growth and the growth of our economy. We have even gone as far as financially contributing to the construction of one of the large dams within the Western Cape supply system. And so we believe that we've played an active role as a user as part of the overall Western Cape supply system.
So let's bring in fair enough. Let's bring in Kevin Winter. So Kevin Winter, what we're hearing from local government is they've done the best they can. This is climate change. It's not man-made. This is purely nature at play. There's nothing that they could have done better. Is that the truth?
Well, I have to say that the account of climate change is, I think, without doubt, becoming a very real and brutal experience. It is uncertainty that has created this period that we're in right now, with low rainfall, as the councillor has just accounted for, with certainly below average rainfall, way below anything we ever had on record. And so she's absolutely correct in identifying a climate change. I think we're not only observing it, I've seen it in models now, and the long-term climate model for the Western Cape is a more drought-prone, dry area with the frequency of the droughts becoming closer and closer. And I think she's quite right. And as we look on the data, and we scientists, as we look on the data, that the only way we can begin to explain what's currently happening, and we don't know how long this is going to last, but certainly it has to be framed within a climate change scenario. And of course, this is the kind of interest worldwide in how many more cities like this will be affected by this very brutal attack on our weather variability.
Okay, and at the very end, I'll ask you what your message is to those other cities that might have some dangers ahead, the likes of Melbourne and Sao Paulo and so on. But let's focus in again on Cape Town. Xanthia, we have Minister Des van Rooyen across the political aisle, undoubtedly a dog in the fight in trying to criticize the DA. He's criticized the Western Cape government for slow spending of the drought relief fund. Have you spent the money properly, or maybe he's right, have you spent it too slowly?
Out of that 74 million, the city of Cape Town received 20.8 million from that 74 million rand. And that grant funding came with conditions, the condition being that we use it solely for the extraction of water from aquifers. And so that is being allocated to the aquifer work in the Table Mountain Group aquifer. And we are spending it on that, and the spending has already occurred. But it essentially is such a minimal amount in terms of the overall budget that the city has set aside to respond to this particular drought.
Xanthia, what's your plan beyond asking people to reduce consumption between now and day zero?
So demand management is key to managing any particular drought, and this is international best practice. But for the medium to long run, the city obviously believes that it is crucial that we tap into alternative water sources so that we're not entirely reliant on surface water through rainfall. And so the city is investing in desalination, the treatment of wastewater for drinking purposes, as well as drilling into our aquifers, and these solutions will form part of our overall water supply in order to ensure that we can mitigate any future risks of droughts that may occur.
Kevin, silver lining that the farmers have been playing their part recently?
Right. I think that the tragedy, is the farmers, without doubt. They've had their water allocation slashed by 60%. They've now used their allocation, and the water irrigation boards that are feeding those farmers have been closed down in some cases. And so it's really tough. They're right at the end of their harvest. I think that's a tragedy. And the fact is that there are at least 50,000 jobs that have been shed as a result of the drought.
And when people, Kevin, say that besides climate change, we have overdevelopment and population growth as additional factors that have brought about this perfect storm, if you like, drought storm, is that accurate?
I think there's a combination of factors all the time. Unfortunately, as you suggest, where you've got all these factors colliding together, that makes it really difficult. And of course, these are the things that we're starting to see with climate change. It doesn't take any prisoners here, and they all come together at the same time. And certainly all across Africa, across South Africa as well, where the large metropolitan cities are urbanizing rapidly. We're currently around about 60% urbanized. By 2030, we'll be somewhere closer to about 73% urbanized. So the pressure is certainly on the cities themselves. And in this sense, the council is absolutely correct in that the water demand management program has been incredibly successful. That virtually a doubling of the population since 1996, where one census was taken at that point, about 2 million people at that stage, to now almost 4 million people, and the actual water demand has stayed relatively stable. So they've done a really good work in managing the water demand very successfully. And of course, that kind of program works well when you've got rain, but when you've got a sudden interruption like this, then you see the problems beginning to mount up. And so it's a combination of population, it's about the ability to afford, it's about the ability to bring human capacity and improve investments in our water infrastructure that all begin to collide at the same time.
And Xanthia, has this been your biggest challenge yet in government?
Well, this drought is unprecedented, and it is obviously calling for a comprehensive, integrated approach beyond just the directorate that I'm politically responsible for. And I think that it teaches us a great lesson, not only for Cape Town, but for South Africa, that we are going to have to massively diversify our water supply because we are in a drought and water-stricken area. And we are going to have to ensure that we become far more water sensitive in how we develop our major cities to ensure that we can sustain ourselves and continue to thrive.
And what's going to happen, Xanthia, if day zero does happen, the rains don't come between now and the South African winter? What's going to happen once you hit day zero? People are going to line up for water as people line up for bread elsewhere in the world?
Well, as a responsible government, we have to plan for worst case scenario. And so we have gotten all of our capacity in place to ensure that we can manage a so-called day zero scenario. This will entail people obtaining their water, 25 litres per person per day at different water collection points. We are planning to install at least 200 of these water collection points. These will be managed by city personnel as well as external volunteer and neighborhood-based organizations. In addition, the South African Police and the South African Army Force will also be assisting and committing their resources to ensure that law and order is maintained. These sites, we have largely completed the technical assessments, done the layout, and we're in the process of procuring the necessary infrastructure and equipment to manage these water collection points. But it is obviously my job as the political oversight responsible to ensure that we don't reach that point, and we are driving all of our efforts to ensure that we can avoid a day zero scenario.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, for those who see Cape Town as a litmus test, it's a big city. It's a city that many people around the world know about, people want to travel to. For those in places like Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Melbourne, and so on, what's the lesson? Don't take the rains for granted?
Well, I guess the first lesson is, as I said early on, this is a brutal act, and it's come on far faster than I think we would have liked. I think we've always had the impression from worldwide, the literature on climate change, that it would be a slow process, that we could manage it, it would give us time, and that we would simply be going into a warmer climate and we could do the various mitigation measures with sufficient time and planning in hand. That's clearly not the case here at all. And so one of the things that we have to think about here is just how much resources do you put ahead in schedule of, say, 20, 30 years ahead in order to deal with this. And of course, for cities in Africa and in South Africa, that's an enormous capital investment that has to take place. And there will always be shortcomings. And the other important thing about a city which makes it completely unique to some of the others you've just listed right now is that we have vast disparities of wealth and poverty within the city. Mm-hmm. And so we have to think really about how water doesn't get to a price which becomes a commodity and makes it extremely difficult to be able to service the poor and the vulnerable. So it's very different in that sense, and of course it's a really interesting city as a case study.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because some people make the point that tightening your belts for some is turning off your sprinklers in your garden, whereas some people in the townships have to line up for water every day as it is. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you, Xanthia Limburg and Kevin Winter. I've got to move on. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
We have only one goal regarding language, to provide the same starting conditions for all children, no matter where they live in Russia. We're talking about Tatarstan now, which I love and where I have many friends. But Tatars live not only in Tatarstan, about half of them live in other Russian regions, and all of them must have equal starting conditions.
That was Vladimir Putin at his annual press conference. Critics of the Russian president accuse him of many things. And one of those is oppressing ethnic minorities in Russia, especially Tatars. Moscow's relations with Russia's Tatar community have been strained for quite some time. But things seem to be getting worse. Last year, local governments were pressured into abolishing local language courses in the ethnic republics. It was a move that led to protests, but Putin stands by the decision, saying it's unacceptable to force a man to learn a language that's not his own. So, is Moscow imposing its own identity onto ethnic minorities? Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from the Georgian capital, Tbilisi, by Neil Hauer. He's a security analyst focused on Russia and the Caucasus. Neil, good to talk to you again on the Newsmakers. In general, does Russia have a problem with the Republic of Tatarstan?
Tatarstan is a very difficult issue for Russia in that it was after Chechnya in the 1990s, the republic that Russia had the most problems with. Chechnya went the more absolute and the more extreme course of declaring independence. And Russia, of course, as we know, had to enter the two wars there to reclaim it. And Tatarstan came close. It had a referendum on its sovereignty, and it stopped short of declaring independence, but it used the results of this referendum to negotiate a privileged position with its relation with Moscow in the center that other republics don't have. And because of this, Vladimir Putin has always viewed it as a difficult issue, and now he's finally moving to bring it further back under central control.
Mm-hmm. And imposing more of a Russian ethnic and linguistic identity. Are we going to see problems emerge from that? Are we going to see a stronger ethnic Tatar identity in response to that?
I think almost definitely. This is actually part of a broader trend that's been happening across Russia in the last several years. Most of a great number of the national minority languages, possibly a majority of them, have been sort of declining on their own due to structural factors. But in the last 2 years here, there's been this real pushback against the Tatar language in Tatarstan, the North Caucasian languages, including Chechen, and even in other places in the North Caucasus where it hasn't happened before. North Ossetia, there's been a reduction in teaching hours for the national language there too. So in all these places, I think it's definitely likely to have the opposite effect of rallying people around the flag. And when they try and do it so overtly to suppress the nationality, it tends to have the opposite cause, and it blows back and makes it into a real issue that people are now talking about openly.
Well, and where these guys differ, I guess, from the limited reading that I did on this, is that they have money, right? So they're a generally relatively prosperous region. So tell me how that factors into the dynamic and why Moscow maybe has to be cautious about how it treats Tatarstan.
Right, you're right about that. Tatarstan's an extremely different case just because of its position and its size and its relative wealth vis-a-vis the North Caucasus, whereas in the North Caucasus, the republics there are largely reliant to a huge extent on transfers from the federal center in Moscow. Tatarstan is actually a net contributor to the budget. Tatarstan has huge oil reserves. It's located not very far. The capital, Kazan, is one of the largest cities in Russia. It's located only a couple hundred kilometers from Moscow. It's much more centrally located and closer to the Russian heartland itself than the North Caucasus. And because of this, it gives them a lot more power vis-a-vis the Kremlin in their negotiating position.
And for those who make the connection between Russia clamping down on the Republic of Tatarstan and Russia's annexation of Crimea and gobbling it up from Ukraine as a sort of broader policy, is that connection relevant? Does it have a sense of continuity, or are they two separate things?
I think that there's not a huge comparison to be made between the two, but of course there is the salient issue of the Crimean Tatars in Crimea who have been consistently harassed and oppressed over the last several years, and there's continuing very regular arrests of activists and clampdowns on Crimean Tatar language abilities and opportunities to learn the language and develop it. And well, I'm not sure that how big of an impact these have on Tatarstan itself. I mean, they're still their ethnic kin, and I think that people there view it as something that's setting an ominous precedent for Tatarstan itself, and that Moscow is probably feeling a little more bold now that it's had success and been relatively unopposed in Crimea with these policies against the Tatars there. And now they're swinging the policies back around to the homeland in Tatarstan itself. Yeah,
all things considered, my final question to you, this is a former empire. Is it trying to recreate itself as a more homogeneous entity?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and it certainly seems like that's part of it. I mean, in the past, in the imperial age, Russia didn't really have a unifying national ideology, as it was just an empire, and countries did not tend to back then. But of course, under the Soviet Union, you had the idea of the socialist brotherhood and communism, the guiding ideology. And underneath that, you had this concept of the Bratstvo Naroda, the brotherhood of peoples. But the thing that really went over the top of all of it was communism. And since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there hasn't been that. The only similar identity they found to fill the void has been Russian nationalism. And of course, having national minorities clashes with this. So I think they're actually making a bigger or a more overt attempt to subvert ethnic nationalities and ethnic minorities in the present day than they have in the past.
Okay, Neil Hauer, always good to pick your brain. Thanks for joining us once again on the Newsmakers.
It was my dream long time, and now I'm happy, absolutely. It's unbelievable.
Mi chiedo vale la pena di restare qui abbracciati mentre il giorno non c'è più e la luna da lassù fa da specchio ai nostri baci. Se ti guardo dentro agli occhi mentre già mi batte il cuore e ti dico che per me stare insieme qui con te ha il sapore dell'amore, mio caro l'amore, se tu mi baci.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Trouble in Paradise. We examine the political crisis unfolding in the Maldives. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.